topic we're going to cover today is near and dear to my heart as I led Exelon's customer technology organization for many years. We are in an interesting time in this industry. The energy transition is underway. We're faced with risks, including customer affordability and climate change. Meanwhile, customer expectations continue to rise, and the talent needed to respond is in high demand. Utilities are making significant investments to improve customer experience. Whether that's investing in digital technology or modernizing the grid, the customers become the center of the utilities universe. Today, we're going to explore where grid modernization intersects with customer outcomes. The panel we've assembled here today brings a wealth of experience and insights into this topic. So let me introduce our panel. I'll start with Utibe Bassey, Vice President, Customer Experience at Dominion Energy. We have Daniel Canavan, Vice President, Regulatory Affairs at Uinet. Next, Josh Tom, Director, Energy Transition Services at National Grid. And John Mannetti, Director, Customer Energy Innovation at Puget Sound Energy. I'm now going to hand things off to our panel moderator, Nolan Woodall, a Senior Consultant within our utilities practice. Nolan?
Thanks, Mike, for kicking us off and welcoming everyone. I want to just share my thanks again to all of you on the line for joining us today, and especially to our panelists who have been very generous with their time to participate in this webinar and support this conversation. As Mike said, my name is Nolan. I'm a Senior Consultant in West Monroe's utilities practice based out of New York. While at West Monroe, I've been very lucky to work on a number of interesting projects, and I think chief amongst those is my current project, which is directly focused on grid modernization initiatives at an East Coast utility. And both because of my recent involvement in the grid modernization space and the fantastic panel we have on hand today, I'm really excited to dig into today's conversation about enhancing customer experience through grid modernization programs. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our panelists to just introduce themselves a little bit more. Panelists, as part of your introductions, please share just a brief opening statement with our audience about your current work or sort of broader professional background as it relates to customer experience or grid modernization initiatives that you've been involved with, just to give our audience a sense of the perspective that you're bringing to bear in this conversation. And, let's move left to right through the pictures we're seeing here. So Utibe, let's start with you.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'll say thank you for having me as part of this discussion. I'm confident it's going to be a really good discussion, and I'm confident it'll be of value to those listening. My name is Utibe Bassey. I am Vice President of Customer Experience at Dominion Energy. I will willing to bet I'm the newest of this group to the industry. So I've been at Dominion just shy of 5 years. So it's going to be 5 years. Before that, I've worked in a range of industries, but most tenured in financial services. I've worked in customer experience, right? Customer experience as a term, I would argue, is relatively new in terms of it being a type of a job. But I've worked in a lot of different roles, whether it's in the front line, I've worked in the contact center, I've worked in technology, I've worked in e-commerce, I've worked in, as I said, insurance, I've worked in hospitality, I've worked in a range of contexts. All of those roles, whether or not they were termed customer experience roles, my job and my personal focus has been on how do you optimize the thing to benefit the human. And I think wherever the conversation anchors on a human and how a business process, operation, experience, product can benefit a person, I think that is where I find I love to dig in and share thoughts there. So looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Utibe. Dan, let's go to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's Dan Canavan from Avangrid. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs. Thanks, Nolan and Mike, for having me today. It's great to be on and talk about this important topic for our customers. I don't come from a customer service background. From the regulatory affairs perspective, I'm often dealing with customer service issues and technology issues on how we get our state regulators to support these endeavors in a world where everything's expensive and there's no shortage of things for utility to spend its capital on. Sometimes it's difficult for regulators, especially some of the ones we deal with in Connecticut, for example, to really invest funds in an area where, might be obvious to all of us have immediate customer impacts, but might be less so to some viewpoints. So that's what I bring today from perspective, is a viewpoint from the regulatory affairs or regulatory recovery perspective. Before serving my current role, I come from the legal side. I've been had senior leader roles, both at Avangrid and at Eversource Energy, a little time in private practice before that as well. So thanks for having me on the panel. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. Josh, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Josh Tom, I'm the Director of Energy Transition Solutions at National Grid. Want to echo the thanks to Nolan and Mike for having me be part of the panel and for setting this up for everyone, and to the other panelists. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. A little bit of background on me, and then a little bit on sort of what my focus is going to be and what my team does in National Grid. So I've been with National Grid for about 6.5 years, all in sort of similar spaces around new clean energy offering, program and product development for customers. Prior to that, I was doing macroeconomic research, touched on energy, but was relatively new to the energy industry when I joined Grid. So that's sort of the business development, business case development concepts or things that I've been mostly focused on, and really been passionate about climate change and clean energy for a long time. As far as what my team specifically focuses on and kind of the lens that I'll bring to this, National Grid, we've got a lot of really robust customer clean energy offering programs that exist today with energy efficiency, demand response, heat pump incentives, EV managed charging programs. I could go on, and that's great. And I think what my team in this energy transition solution space is looking at is how do we think about pairing those customer programs in a way that truly address how we are evolving, how we manage our grid. So thinking more about some of those local grid needs, what are the planners in our organizations needing and seeing, where can flexibility from the ways that our customers today are generating energy, they're consuming loads, there's flexibility with storage and EVs. How can we think about how to offer the right things that provide a good customer experience, that also provide value to us, the utilities, for how we manage and operate the grid? And so it's a really exciting space for me, and I think that's really the lens that I'll bring to the conversation.
Thanks, Josh. And John, finish us off.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm John Mannetti, the Director of Customer Energy Innovation at Puget Sound Energy. I'm coming from Bellevue, Washington today. I've been with PSE for about 16 years, and I've done all kinds of different roles. So I've had operational experience, asset management. I've led our wind farm fleet. I've done load forecasting, resource planning, large IT implementations, and this is my sort of first customer role here at PSE. And what my scope is right now is the development and operation of all of our product offerings related to distributed energy resources, so our solar programs, distributed batteries, and electric vehicles. And similar to Josh, what I think about is, how are we orchestrating the customer experience to gain as much adoption as we can in these new technologies, with the benefit that those technologies can provide to the grid and to customers in an environment where our loads are growing faster than a business as usual approach can serve those loads, harnessing every bit of latent capacity out there from our customers and having those sort of bidirectional interactions, exchanging energy and value with our customers in real time, is something that I think about a lot. We call that energy orchestration at PSE, and I'm hoping that's the perspective I can bring to this conversation.
Thanks, John. And thank you all for those terrific introductions. Before we dive in, I just have 2 call outs for our attendees. We do have a Q&A function built into the webinar portal. Hopefully you're seeing that at the top of your meeting bar there. I encourage you to submit questions via the Q&A function. Use the Q&A function, not the chat function. And if there's time at the end, we may be able to address a couple questions from the audience. And then this session is being recorded, and a recording will be made available in a follow-up communication from us. So with that, let's dive right in. So there's a lot of ground to cover today, but I'd love to focus the start of this conversation on the technology side of the house. I know we've heard from each of the panelists, about different kinds of technology they're thinking about and interacting with in their roles. And specifically, panelists, I'd like to hear about the different kinds of technology that you all are seeing having a notable impact on the utility-customer relationship. Utibe, maybe let's start with you. Just looking broadly, what technologies have had the biggest impact on improving customer engagement in recent years from what you've seen so far?
Yeah, and the examples I'll give, I expect to be relatively common. Naturally, the technology should be in service of something, right? So not technology for the sake of technology, but like in service of something, and that thing must be a need or an opportunity. I think in this industry, obviously AMI meters have played a significant role, as an obvious point, the in fostering a more sort of fluid and cohesive relationship with customers. Um, the data that we have, right, and it's really because again, it's not just having the technology. It's like, what do you do with it? But I think being able to arm people. Most customers want to know a few things. They want to know why do they call us? They will call us because the bill is high and they want to know why, right? They want to know what's driving their energy. They want to know what they can do to reduce energy, to save money. They want to know when an outage will be restored. And I think that piece of technology helps to answer a lot of those questions in a way, in a very intelligent way. Of course, that also has impacts to the business, and there's operational benefits to that. But that's probably for me that foundational starting point. I'm sure at some point in this conversation, we'll dive into generative AI and the role it's playing now, right? I mean, things that are, that are imminent and happening right now, and the role it's playing now in changing that relationship for customers. But I think the smarter the meter, the smarter the utility is able to be, and the more value the utility is able to provide to the customer. So that's where I will launch.
It's a great opening statement, great perspective. Dan, maybe from your perspective, you were talking about some of the challenges you're seeing in different jurisdictions you've been connected to. What about you? Are there specific kinds of technologies that you're seeing being, implemented successfully or having like a good track record of generating customer engagement and getting buy-in from, that specific jurisdiction?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, here in Connecticut, for one of the Avangrid companies, we've been very successful in getting AMI rolled out to our customers. We've actually, have a 90% penetration rate on our AMI meters, which is great. And compared to some of the other utilities in Connecticut, is leading the pack. And AMI is, as everyone knows, opens up so many doors. But one of the things that I think we've been seeing is that we've been able to automate our move in, move out process. So that cuts down on customer service rep time and cuts down on rolling trucks. It has obvious upside from a business perspective, and it's what customers want, right? As we all know, we always compare ourselves to Amazon or Apple products, and utilities are largely a couple steps behind those, if not more. And I think we've been able to get a little bit closer with this move in, move out process, which is a lion's share of what calls we were used to getting. So I think that's a success story, but none of that happens without those AMI meters. So, that has been a success story here in Connecticut, where we are in an environment where it's very, very difficult to get funding from our regulator to, really roll out some of these more advanced technologies. That's unique to Connecticut. I'm sure that's not, across the board. And I'm sure other panel members will have different stories, but we are in a capital restrictive environment here in Connecticut, which is proving difficult for all these technologies, quite frankly.
Yeah, Dan, Utibe, I'm really glad you guys are bringing up the example of AMI, because I think that's a good example of how utilities are becoming increasingly focused on connecting with customers through smart devices, perhaps even apps within phones. I know my local utility, I have an app I can log into to see my usage, get alerts about high usage months, things like that. If we take maybe a different look at this question about technology, Josh, maybe I'll turn to you now. Are there any trends you're seeing at National Grid or other utilities more broadly when it comes to integrating those kinds of like smart devices or IoT or otherwise into your customer offerings? And I'm curious, what kind of impact do those programs have on perhaps like the kinds of capital investment planning you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, I think Utibe and Dan hit around that. I was going to start with AMI too. So, I mean, I think that like just adding a little bit and then getting to sort of your question about how we integrate into programs. Like we talk about as Utibe, you were talking about like outage restoration, bill paying, like what are the moments that matter to a customer? And like, that's the phrase that we use a lot at National Grid is sort of what are the moments that matter? And I think you've got, past 1 month manual meter read to like 15-minute interval data that's just available for customers. You were saying, Nolan, on their phone and their app. There's just a lot that unlocks. We're at a little bit of a different stage of deployment. So we are about halfway through in our upstate New York territory deploying like our AMI 2.0 meters too. And so I think we've got like 800,000 out of 1.7 million done so far. And then Massachusetts, we're a little bit following that up. So we're catching up there in Massachusetts. But I think to get into the idea of like, how does that manifest itself into a program? So, you imagine, so first you go from 1 month to say 15 minutes or even more real time than that, that's at a customer's fingertips. And then there's additional things where you talked about apps and other things you can build on top, or partnerships that we're exploring where you might be able to even disaggregate at the appliance level and be showing like, not just here's what as a residential customer, here's what my usage is for this 15-minute period, but even more real time than that, here's what's happening with my EV. Here's what's happening with my heat pump. Here's what's happening with my refrigerator. I mean, it doesn't have to be like the EV heat pump types of things. And that then becomes an opportunity for us to think about the programs that we offer and how we can go directly via the meter to target marketing, to understand what usage really looks like at a more granular level, to then inform what should program design look like. Are we designing our programs in the right way to get maximum participation and really incentivizing customers in the way that makes sense for sort of the load flexibility that we actually want to get? So I think we're at maybe an early-ish stage in how we integrate the learnings from AMI as we're deploying it into new programs, but it's something that we're not doing a sequential wait until we have all the meters and then start thinking about. They're really two parallel tracks. So I think that's the main thing I would add, Nolan. And then just a quick one in terms of technology. I do want to also call out that there are grid sort of technologies that then can have a big impact on the customer. So like one example that has been a big focus for us with interconnection and new connections is around flexible connections. And if customers are having a hard time, whether it's a developer or commercial customer, trying to get solar or storage through the queue to interconnect, and utility has to study it in a certain way, it's going to take a certain amount of time. If we can have the ability to say, hey, only a certain amount of time each year, you may have to curtail, but it's probably you could connect, 2 years faster and much more cheaply. That might be an appealing thing to customers. And we need technology, and we have technology that we're deploying that's kind of more grid technology than customer technology, but it enables a potential customer experience that is a faster, more affordable interconnection. So that's another big area at National Grid that we're really focused on. So I just wanted to add that in there as well.
Great points to add, and bringing up a lot of good topics that I'd love to, circle back to at some point as we get deeper into the conversation here. John, anything you would want to add to the mix here from your perspective in your region?
Yeah, I'll just say, just from an engagement standpoint, it sounds simple, but just the multi-channel way of engaging customers now has just had a huge impact. So, customers can self-serve through the IVR, they can self-serve through the app, and social media. And so, I think that's, really helped out with the engagement in addition to like that usage data we can show. I'll say from a smart home devices. So, I really like what Josh said around designing programs that can help get that engagement. I would say like we are now sort of doing that in the implementation of our virtual power plant. We have incentivized programs now for electric vehicles, residential batteries, smart thermostats. And our approach has been to sort of bring them all onto one platform and not necessarily, waiting for the perfect answer, but just trying things out and trying to use that one platform to move things forward. And we've been pretty successful in just a short amount of time in being able to get 100 megawatts of capacity reduction through our virtual power plant, which for us is significant.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I love that each of you is kind of doing this natural bridge of talking about this technology component, but also looking more broadly at innovation within the utility, whether that's load disaggregation, IVR, as you said, John. There's obviously a really rich opportunity for utilities to continue innovating at the grid edge and within the grid to continue delivering that really excellent customer experience. But I also know that utilities think very carefully about what makes sense for their operations and customers from an innovation standpoint, meaning, like what are the benefits and trade-offs that are coming from our innovative program offerings, rather than just innovating simply for innovation's sake. So Dan, maybe I'd like to circle back and hear your take here. how are utilities, you could give your own perspective from
Right.
Avangrid or broader, how do you balance innovation, especially when it comes to a new customer facing technology, but also making sure that you're maintaining reliability, resiliency, and just operation of the grid itself?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, providing safe and reliable service is all our core mission, and not that that is in lieu of good customer interactions, but certainly that is the core of what we do. And if we fail at that, our customer interactions will likely not be so great, right? So, I think our company has puts a large emphasis on innovation. As part of the Iberdrola group, we are seeing things around the world that um, you know, are being developed and identified in other states, and they may or may, other countries that may or may not make sense here. The challenge we really have here in the United States, especially with Connecticut, is that there's no appetite for supporting any of these technologies that the company would otherwise be willing to give it a shot. We work in an environment here where it's the state is more apt to provide those opportunities to non-utilities or not the incumbent utilities. So we are often, in a situation where we have great ideas. We have great people working on this literally around the world, and we can bring a lot of value to a state like Connecticut. But at the same time, the positioning of the state and our regulator is that we don't need your help. We'd rather be worried about bill impacts next month or the month after that, as opposed to bill impacts 10 or 15 years from now, where we know that the industry is going to evolve and provide innovative technologies that are not only going to provide value to customers, but also continue to, make sure that rates are, grow at a reasonable rate. So that is the challenge we have in Connecticut. The challenges we see in our other grid states. I think in other areas where, in Maine, for example, we do have AMI deployment, but we also, have a very large billing system upgrades that are required. And we've been largely successful working with those states to really work with us to make sure customers are getting the most out of their capital investment in the meters. So, we are supportive of innovation. We find ourselves sometimes at loggerheads with our local regulators here in Connecticut, who again would rather see non-utilities really explore that space. And that's a challenge, I think, for us and maybe a challenge that other folks are experiencing elsewhere.
Yeah, it sounds like a real challenge. Definitely a hard issue to wrestle with. Before I, maybe take the question in a slightly different direction, Utibe, John, Josh, anything you would want to respond to there?
I think it's similar, and I think it'd be similar for sort of any state regulated utility where it's sort of like going to a hospital and they don't do that well in treating you, but they have a cool app, like that's not why you're there. You're there for treatment, right? And so as a utility, we track NPS, we track CSAT, none of that mattered. Reliability is the name of the game. And so as we think about, and you mentioned this, Nolan, right? We have to be very prudent in what we invest in. And so the foundational question I think that you're asking is sort of how do utilities operate strategically and purposefully? Because you need to know what you're solving for. So even innovation is like, what's the purpose of it? Well, if you're clear on your destination, like in 5 years, we need to be here, then your innovation is in service of that. And it's a clearer through line, as opposed to something everyone else is doing it, therefore let's do it. And so we need to, because of the industry that we're in and our obligation and our commitment to service, be able to defend every investment and connect the dots very clearly between doing this is in response to customer need. They've told us very clearly they want it. Or there's definitely a savings component, whether now or in the future. There has to be some very clear data backed value. And so I don't see it as a dichotomy between innovation and reliability. In fact, all of it is in service of the mission, similar to Dan. The ways we can express that mission today may be one thing. The ways we need to express that mission in 5 years may be another. And so to do that effectively, we need to invest. And so that's how we think about innovation. It's very tightly connected, has to be very tightly connected to the core mission. Else, this is the industry that we're in. We're not afforded the luxury of deviating from a very tight strategy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Utibe, Dan, I would love to keep picking on you two for the kind of like this next line of questioning. So it's clear, as you two mentioned, there Oh yeah, it's clear.
Guys, let's go.
Oh yeah. It's clear. It's clear based on what you've said. Like innovative grid mod programs can have some really meaningful benefits for our energy systems, for our customers, but it can be challenging to like bring those benefits to life. Bring it out of a spreadsheet or bring it out of a presentation, and whether it's a regulator or a customer, really help them understand like what is the benefit that's being delivered here. Based on what you've seen so far, are there examples of when communication of customer benefits or grid benefits has gone really well, or do you see opportunities to kind of improve that communication style to get these needed investments over the finish line?
Yeah, I feel like we are in an environment where we cannot spend enough time talking to customers about our business and the service we provide, how our rates are developed, how they're getting value for whatever, may be included in that revenue requirement, including, some of the grid mod items. I think we are in a industry where it's a lot of inside baseball, right? And everyone on this call probably appreciates that. So when I talk to customers, I mean, I just, I am reminded that we cannot be talking enough about how we provide service and how some of these new technologies can be helpful. Even, when you talk about things that are pretty concrete or like tangible, like EV charging programs or solar panels and connection, those are great examples. You can sit down with a customer and talk about them. But then when you talk about, we're going to invest in some additional grid mod, things on the system, sometimes you kind of get lost in the shuffle, So I think that, our teams do a great job of exploring the different options on our mobile app, some of the new things that have come on the last couple of years, that provide, that more of that Amazon or Apple type experience. Those are great examples. And I think when you're in a rate case or developing a rate case and you're talking to legislative leaders or customers, you can kind of pull it up on your phone and show you, all the great things you can do. And this is going to be, in your pocket going forward, and this is what you're paying for, and that increased rates. We also have a lot of things with municipalities about outage maps that are provide those municipal leaders with more information during major events. I mean, that's another great example where you can sit in a fire department or in a town hall and pull this up on a laptop and show this is what we're seeing essentially in our operations center, and here you go, it's right here in your room, in your office. I think those are things are great to sit down with customers and show, and again, are a little bit more tangible than some of the more inside baseball, system upgrades that we might be talking about, in industry rooms.
Yeah, and I'll respond to the portion of your question, Nolan, on where communication has gone well. I'll offer a perspective. I think it depends on obviously who you're communicating to. It's important to be very clear on the outcome you want from that communication. So if I'm speaking to you about, hey, I want to build something in your backyard, I need to be very clear on what the outcome I want from that communication is, versus if I'm speaking to you about download a new app, right? So that's one. Like, just the idea of communication is, we all may have heard this term. It's not what you say, it's what they hear. And so we need to be very clear, in our utility world about what exactly do we want to happen as a result of this? What does success look like? We can't check the box at the action. We have to check the box at the outcome. And what is that outcome we want? And you can't achieve, in my opinion, you can't achieve that outcome if you're not listening, because so much of what you should be saying should be based on what you're hearing. We industry-wide, we should be mirroring what people are saying as their need. And we should be building what they're saying as where we can. Obviously, now we can't always do that given our industry. But even when we can't do that, we should be listening to what their pain points are and reflecting our understanding of that. And so communication from my perspective, right, and how we think about it at Dominion, and I'm one of a broad team that thinks about communication. There's an actual huge communications team, but the effectiveness is dependent on the outcome that we're solving for. B, it depends on data and research and listening. Like, we really invest a lot in that, in those tools, because we want to make sure that what we're saying and what customers are asking for are not different. And I think 3, similar to Dan, is best to sometimes, where you can, you show, you don't tell. That sort of speaks. So I think that's where, in terms of communication, that's been effective. I'll use the same word, but it's where it's purposeful and where it's targeted and where it's clear what success looks like. That's where I see communication be effective. And I actually think that works if you're out, depending, regardless if you're a stakeholder, a customer, an employee, a regulator, it doesn't matter. I think the principles and on those principles work for all.
Dylan, if I could add just a thought as TV and Dan were talking, the sort of a specific like programmatic example of this idea of the inside baseball and like how we might internally think about the value of a new program enhancement or new program we deliver versus what the message is to the customer. So one of the things that like we're really looking at is like, John, we've got these, programs, VPPs, customers that participate in demand response, several hundred megawatts across Massachusetts and New York, but they're all being called to basically reduce demand on specific days at specific times all across the territory. And what we want to be able to do is target specific customers in specific locations because we have an actual grid need in that location. But that doesn't need to be the messaging to a customer. So the messaging to a customer is more like, hey, you are currently enrolled in this program. You're being paid this amount already that you signed up for doing this thing. We're going to now offer you more money to do that same thing a few more times. Like, I'm not saying I have the exact marketing materials, but there's this version of, it doesn't need to be because you are doing this thing, you're impacting the reliability of this feeder and this, and then all of a sudden you've kind of lost it. So I think there is this really important, what is the outcome that you're trying to drive internally for National Grid is one specific thing, but how do we get customers interested in participating? It's simple, it's clear, it's related to what they want to know and what they want to hear. How is this going to impact my bill? Can I earn money on it? Is it going to disrupt my experience? Do I have to do anything differently? Is it automated? Like, what are their key needs? So, that's a version of like hey, as we think about a program, we have to make sure we sort of separate out the customer message versus how we're thinking about the impact of the program internally at the utility.
Yeah, great point. Great point. And I think if I'm picking up on the thread that you all are laying down, Dan, you talked about bringing that Apple and Amazon like experience to customers, and Utibe, you're talking about, how important it is to have clear communications. Both Utibe and Josh being really clear in your communications with customers about, the benefits that you're offering them. And so, customer communications seems to be like a really rich frontier for innovating around and improving the experiences customers are having with their utilities. And I feel like a topic that I'm seeing gain, increasing traction with utilities is leveraging, predictive analytics. Utibe, maybe this is getting to that space of Gen AI that you brought up at the start to, improve the customer experience as a whole. Josh, maybe if I just pick on you one more time, like, are you seeing a specific niche or specific, useful application of predictive analytics or Gen AI in terms of personalizing or keying those communications in a tangible, impactful way for customers?
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity area. I do think it's still somewhat early. I'll go back to what I referenced a little bit before with AMI and then some of the things beyond AMI when it comes to things like load disaggregation. Like, you can imagine that if you are using predictive AI to be able to say, based on as customer X, your usage over a certain amount of time, it looks like perhaps your heating bills are going higher because something's not working right. Like, you can start to get into some details of surfacing either problems or opportunities. Hey, this might be a way in which we immediately target this customer for a heat pump incentive that you could be eligible for. Like, actually, you're in a specific case where your current AC is not working well. And did you know that there's cooling benefits that you could use from a heat pump? So I think there's ways where you can really get into, like you said, the word personalized, targeted connection with the utility through the meter, where we're saying, for you, not for all of our residential customers, your behavior, your energy usage, the applications or the appliances that you use, you seem like you would be a good fit for this. Are you interested? And then it goes to the messaging of like, what is it that's being offered to them and what is it that's going to be valuable to them? But I think it's a really, really big opportunity and something that we're definitely, quite interested in.
I can tag on to that a little bit. I think, even the next step, right, is developing kind of customer models based on, publicly available permitting data or EV registration data, or kind of continuing the thread on AMI usage disaggregation, and really developing like locationally on the system, like what are the attributes of those customers bringing in external factors just to understand how might their behavior change and over the course of different extreme weather events or different demand profiles. And I think the common phrase is like digital twin, right? But you could have a digital twin for your customers that you build up as a model that you can then input into load forecasting, resource planning, alongside the system models to understand how the system could behave in different scenarios. Where can you find different value for different penetration of devices or programs? And I think one thing we're really trying to focus on now is like, where is that value? Because there's so many different value streams you could quantify around distributed resources. You have locational value to the grid, you have capacity value, you have resilience value, and how we stack those things really determines sort of what the utility is willing to pay, how it impacts affordability relative to other investments. And so I think knowing your customers and knowing what they have and trying to understand how to factor that into your broader planning is key. And I think the predictive analytics and AI can really sort of help jumpstart that in a way that we haven't seen before.
I think that's a great point, John. And you raised some really good points about, if you're building a model or, stringing together some data sets to, gain some predictive insights or predictive capabilities about, building customer profiles, like that can all build to a really impactful program. But if we take maybe a step back, getting up to the point where a utility can actually deploy an advanced use case like that you're describing, predictive analytics for fill in the blank. Obviously, that has a long lead up times in terms of planning, program design, investment, all those items you just mentioned. When you think about bringing a customer-facing innovative program or technology to life at Puget Sound Energy, whether it's virtual power plant or resource aggregation program, are there certain kinds of like foundational investments or steps that have to happen up front? Whether it's certain allocations of capital, technology implementation, customer relationship building. Are there specific first step check marks you have to meet in order to ensure programs are enabling direct benefits for your customers?
Yeah, I think the first step is to kind of come back to you have to know what it's worth. And you have to know where the benefit is going to be, both for the customer. What are they getting? Are they getting an energy benefit? Are they getting an incentive to enroll? What's it worth for utility? And what's that avoided capacity value worth? Is there a locational value to the grid? Is there a non-wires alternative benefit that this is filling? And so that kind of helps kind of craft generally what we think we might be willing to pay for it. And then, in our case, then I think we can leverage some of, we have a lot of experience developing customer programs through our energy efficiency programs over the last, 20, 30 years, some of our new DER programs. And so it's really more of an iteration rather than a new foundation. And so it's sort of the next iteration of those programs coupled with, implementation of our virtual power plant through AutoGrid, now Uplight, and sort of bring those things. If it's a tree, we're hanging different ornaments on that tree and trying our best to integrate it through one platform so that we can try to control it and forecast it. And I'd say the other thing is just on the customer journey. You really have to have a consistent customer experience, customer journey to get that reach. I think we have well over 100 programs that customers could enroll in. So one of the things we're really focused on is how do we streamline that in a way that customers know what is the next best option for them? How are they going to benefit? The customers who are enrolled in our programs are like really satisfied. They're 80, 90% satisfied. But I think just struggling just with reach and awareness is something that's our kind of the next frontier. So it's like we have a lot of great programs. Now, how do we tune our reach and streamline that journey for them to make it easier to adopt and enroll?
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think this is a really good point to transition into our next topic for discussion, which is, you were talking about benefits, John, and obviously a big benefit that always, is top of mind for utilities and customers and regulators is affordability. So, I would really love for us to talk a little bit more about how modernization investments can contribute to better long-term customer affordability. I know personally from my time working on grid mod products that long-term affordability, cost management, things like that for ratepayers are often viewed as priority zero for the utility. So I'm just curious from your all experience, how have you seen grid modernization investments help reduce cost for customers over time? Maybe Dan, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a very difficult environment in Connecticut where, just to give folks our perspective is that, we can't even get our plant and service recovered. So when we talk about let's go out and let's pack a rate case full of innovative technologies and get, buy-in from our regulator, we have some fundamental challenges in Connecticut on that. So I don't think we've quite seen that quite yet in my experience here, just because we are fighting to recover basic dollars. But, we also have, programs like, the EV programs where the state is in very much a buy now, pay later mentality. And it is frustrating in the sense that we continue to tell and message up that all you're doing is delaying these infrastructure investments and you're missing the opportunity on some of the innovative technologies that could really impact customers. And what I think you're going to see, oh, by the way, in other states get far ahead of Connecticut here in the not too distant future. So, my experience here has not been great for that perspective. And that is just some fundamental challenges we have, I think, in my local jurisdiction. But I'm really excited to hear what the other other panelists may have experienced elsewhere.
I think we do have good support, generally from our regulatory body, our commission for grid mod investments. And, I think you can kind of point to operational efficiencies that you can gain through, grid automation, faster fault isolation, lower maintenance costs. I think it's almost like thinking about, and we're in an environment where we have, very aggressive renewable energy targets. We have to be 80% clean and 100% carbon neutral by 2030 for our entire supply. So it's triggering massive investment across in our generation space, as well as like many utilities across the country, seeing just unprecedented load growth and requests for load. And so I think the way we view it is business as usual just cannot serve this need, and we have to innovate. And if we don't, the net result is going to be much more expensive for our customers. And I think, we've had some success conveying those arguments to our regulators. We have a grid modernization program that we can recover in our rate cases, and now sort of embedding those investments into our capital planning as kind of enabling investments for the future.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think we're at National Grid in New York and Massachusetts, probably closer to John, what John was describing there, as far as the, we had a Massachusetts grid modernization plan from a few years ago. It got approved. That was for a bunch of different investments. Some of the things that John was talking about, a lot of it starting to get the beginning stages of, distributed energy resource management systems, DERMS being a big piece of all of this. We've got some things that are active in Massachusetts and New York right now, but definitely there's a lot that's in there around innovation, grid mod, and a story around how that brings benefits to customers. I think at the highest level, there's a version of, we have these big lofty stake goals as well from a climate change perspective. And you look at it and you look at load forecasts and you say, okay, if we're going to get this number of EVs and we get this number of heat pumps, then the load that we're going to have to build the network for is going to potentially double. It's going to shift a lot. We're going to go from summer peaking to winter peaking at some point if we get that many heat pumps online. So there's a cost of what that network would be to build. And then there's theoretically a cost to build that network with grid modernization investments alongside of it, where you're managing the grid and potentially bending that curve of peak load growth, even if the total number of EVs and heat pumps is going to be the same. And that gets into what drives a lot of the investments that we're making in terms of customer programs that we were talking about before. Like John mentioned, non-wires alternatives. We've got these customer programs over here, and I've said it a few times, but if you can show that the grid modernization DERMS investments that you're making help us manage customer resources in a way that is helping to either defer, probably long-term, not avoid much, but at least defer some of the capital infrastructure investments that we make at a lower cost, then that is a cost benefit to all customers as far as our ratepayers. And that's not necessarily you'll see that next year, but it is if you make these investments now, the long-term customer benefits will come. And I think that our regulators not only, understand and agree with that story at a high level, but a lot of our other stakeholders in Massachusetts and New York have continued to push us and the state in that direction as well of, be really intentional about smartly managing how you build out the network over the next 10, 20, 30 years to get to our goals.
Not to mention, if you can use those systems to bring loads on faster through the flexible integration we were talking about, that has downward pressure on rates because you're able to get sort of more revenue in the door more quickly, which will sort of help with affordability.
Very interesting. Yeah, really good. Thank you for sharing. I think that provides like a really nice high level overview of how, grid mod investments can help reduce costs for customers, especially that last point you just raised, John. But I'm hoping we could maybe unpack a little bit more about how utilities are actually in identifying those investments that make sense from an affordability perspective. I know we've talked about this a little bit already, but specifically, I'm curious if you all can shed some light on how on some success stories or maybe some challenges you're seeing using data to identify cost saving opportunities for customers, and how those data finding exercises or just broader kind of investment prioritization exercises are helping you identify investments that make the most sense. Utibe, maybe we start with you if you have something to share on this topic.
Yeah, sure. I think my view will be more so from like the customer data, right, and customer research perspective. And so through a range of sources, I'm certain many utilities, whether it's touch point surveys or broader research surveys and or sort of industry aggregator surveys like JD Power, like we're always listening to customers and we're getting those verbatims. And then I think from those sources, I'll be remiss if I didn't mention our contact center, right? And the feedback that we get there. I think from those sources, letters that we get from customers that go to executive, again, there's a range of sources and there's a range of data. And from our perspective, right, again, I'm speaking more from the customer perspective. A lot of what we would do with that data is analyze it and say, what are the big themes, right? Where is the service broken? And the customer may not articulate what we need to do in the way we would end up doing it, but they'll talk about a service failure and they'll talk about why don't I know this, right? You're the power company. Why don't I have this information? Why don't I know when my power is out? Why don't you tell me when X happens? And you get enough of those data points and you see that the lack of knowledge on this thing, for example, using as an example, is driving X number of calls, costing us Y. Should we not invest in it? And so we use customer data to drive a range of strategic decisions, right? Some of those filter up to the team from a grid mod perspective. Some of those result in, necessarily changes in communication. Necessarily, they can result in ideas for new DSM programs. But our goal is to hear from customers and understand what they see as missing that we may not think about, and use that feedback to drive the investment, which also helps to share and to show that, hey, this thing we're seeking funding for is based on direct customer feedback. It's based on what we know they said they want. So that is a big source of data for us that feeds many different investments, some technology, some the grid, and otherwise.
Yeah, really, really important. Making sure that that customer data component is a big part of the vision and execution. Maybe circling back to a different take on this question, circling back to the concept of Gen AI. Are any of you seeing opportunities or applications of Gen AI to get greater insights into data or applying data to help your respective utilities make investment decisions?
Yeah, from our perspective, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface. I mean, AI is such a powerful tool, and I'm sure we all have experience with it. That the first time you exposed to it, it kind of blew your mind. And I feel like we have not, as a company, really maximized or even started to really think about how we can use AI from a customer technology or customer facing perspective. I know there's a lot of work at a company to get started on that. It seems like, we're not quite there yet. I'm curious what other folks are seeing on that front, if people are further ahead or much further behind.
I'd say we're just on the cusp, and it's like from a system planning standpoint, we have system models, obviously, that can help us understand, where faults could occur. I think something that could be an interesting use of AI is really thinking about like optimizing flexibility. So, where would no regrets investments be on the system to bring in loads to where, okay, maybe the load request isn't there yet, but generally based on, economic development or other data sources that, this specific place would be a great place to put a new substation, and through switching your system in different ways, you could serve loads and within a different, within a certain geographic area of that. So I think like AI as helping flexibility and model flexibility in different sort of scenario planning for the grid planners is going to be really valuable. Not quite there yet, but I don't think it's far away personally.
Yeah, just to add on that last point, I think about it as sort of so many different things that we talk about come back to like, how do we better forecast? And like we were talking a lot about AMI, then what John's talking about with generative AI and how you could kind of focus it on where is flexibility needed. That can help you figure out where to build, but then it can also be, how do you engage with, first, if you know more about your customer base in a particular location, you've got a sense of what are the tools or what are the mechanisms we can engage those customers for flexibility in a certain area. So like, for example, if on a particular feeder, you knew that, or you expected, as John was saying, you're going to have a lot of EV growth versus in another location, you might have a lot of heat pump growth, or you might have a lot of industrial, maybe it's more commercial versus residential, whatever. You kind of get a sense of things. You could then start to target and think about who are the customers where I know that the general patterns of EV charging are X. And so if we incentivize managed charging at a particular time, that really on that particular feeder or substation gives us an opportunity to manage that flexibility in a different way than maybe a different feeder over there. So I think there's some really interesting like local flexibility opportunities that could unlock. But like the other panelists have said, I think I don't want to speak for the entire company because we're a big company. So there's lots of people probably on the distribution planning side that are doing plenty of things in this space that I'm not fully bought into or read into. But I think it's super exciting, like the other panelists have said as well. So
Maybe one more thought. I had the, privilege of spending yesterday afternoon with a AI think tank here in Seattle, which is kind of a hub of AI. We've got, Microsoft, Amazon, and lots of startups. And the thing that really blew my mind, right, was just the pace of change of all of this. What was maybe considered not possible 3 months ago or 6 months ago is now possible. And so the rapid evolution of this technology to help construct data sets, ingests unstructured data, structured data, put together models, is sort of, almost impossible to believe. And so I almost feel like we're almost only limited by our imaginations at this point. And when you think about a system planning process or a resource planning process where you turn the crank every 2 years, those things are all going to be obsolete on a multi-year planning cycle. Is it almost feels like, we'll be eclipsed by whatever comes to take its place in that time frame, just from the sophistication of this technology and helping aid these planning and business processes. Interesting problem to solve, but also I think lots of opportunities.
It's very fascinating, John. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in that meeting. And we've definitely dipped our toes in it. And it's true. So right now I'm in South Carolina, visiting with our team, and we were in a meeting yesterday. And I remember at some point, because the team is exploring all these use cases, and I remember saying out loud, "Is this real life? Like, I can't believe that this is a thing that we are actually able to actually do." And like last year, we're not even. I remember being a meeting, and our CIO talked about AI and as this thing that would happen. And I remember thinking, maybe 3-4 years from now, and all of a sudden, so we're in it. I think obviously if you think about the contact center as a use case, it's ripe with opportunities because, of course, AI could help you predict, but it could also help you assess and identify patterns and trends. And so we believe that we have not scratched the surface, even in our customer call data. Like what exactly are driving these calls, right? We've been limited in the past by what people pressed. But it's more than what they press. Sometimes people just press the first prompt that press one, sure, 111. And so we're investing in getting more intelligent and hoping that informs not just customer service improvements, but improvements upstream in the journey as well. And I know there's a lot of work beyond our customer team across the company on the AI use cases. So we're in it, and I share that sentiment, John. It's crazy how quickly it's come upon us, and I think that's not slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that point, yeah, John, the point you made, what we thought was impossible 3 months ago is now seeming increasingly more possible. And the power of predictive analytics, Gen AI, seems to just be limitless in terms of what it can, in terms of the kinds of insights that it can unlock, the value it can deliver. But maybe I'm curious, like, do any of you see specific areas within the utility operations landscape, either customer-centric or not, that are perhaps a little more resistant to a Gen AI or predictive analytics style use case? And if you are brave enough, maybe could you share your perspective on like what would have to change or come true in order for that topic area to become, solvable with a Gen AI or predictive analytics solution?
I'm not seeing resistance, but it's a good question. I'm not seeing resistance. It's also, again, as a big company. But what I am realizing, and I think it's been evident even again from these meetings I was in yesterday, is the amount of change management required. We can't also underestimate that, because if we're asking, right, so I'll use the contact center as an example, we're asking our agents to work with new tools and technology, right? So one of the things that we're looking at is a wrap-up bot. So for those familiar with the contact center, after a call, the agent has to type up a summary. And you can imagine that there will be inconsistencies in how I would wrap up a call and how Nolan might wrap up a call, what Dan might say in his wrap up, which makes it harder for us to analyze more as a system. What are people calling about? And so there's a tool that does the wrap up for you, right? And you might think, of course, easy, just implement it. All the agents will love it. But they want to see it work. But we're finding that for the initial pilot group, we actually saw some of those metrics go in the opposite direction. Why? Because agents didn't trust it yet. They didn't, so what you would think was they would read it, they would not need to do any more work. They would just please, the AI is taking care of it. But they care so much about what's being reported under their call that they're stopping now to read it and edit it, which is taking more time than if they were just putting in their shorthand acronym. So that's as an example where it's not resistance. I think what we've seen, of course, it matters how leaders introduce the tools. It's there to aid. It's not there to replace. It's there to augment. It's there to accelerate. It's there to help them focus on what they want to do most, which is focus on the customer. But if it's introduced in a way that ignores that there is still a curve for the humans that, have the accountability of the outcome, they need to learn what it means for them. And so I think the change management piece, more than anything, from our perspective, Nolan, it can't be ignored and underestimated. And I think that's that's probably the long road, not the technology implementation, because so much is happening so quickly. I think the long road is in the change management required for certain teams.
Yeah, and I'd say like the flip side of that is like it can be a force multiplier, and that's what's really exciting about it because we're all stretched so thin every day. The prospect of being able to train a call center agent faster, or in a smaller class size, because this information, when a customer calls in, AI is pulling all the relevant information about the customer, including external factors, and recommending to the agent, what actions are available. Even in my own area, like we're starting to use it to review simple interconnection drawings and reduce engineer time. We're trying to compare the terms of contracts and unstructured data to what we're receiving in revenue, and all of these things just help multiply the value of our workforce. And I think that's just really exciting to people.
Almost on script, literally someone just sent me an email that said co-pilot generated decks, and they literally sent me a folder of decks that they had asked the AI to build for different use cases. So to your point on being a force multiplier, that absolutely is part of the story.
Yeah, the only thing I was it's the interconnection piece is the one that really jumps out to me, because this like idea of, and it is change management, I think, more than it is, as Utibe, you were saying, of if you can get people comfortable with using a tool that helps with the spreadsheet analysis required for study timelines, and you can shorten those timelines by automating some of the processes, it's like such a tangible benefit. And then you can imagine that like one engineer can do so many more things with their total hours of a day or hours of a week than they could otherwise. And it's a really tangible benefit, but it's also not something, exactly to Utibe's point, that you can just, where's the trust going to be in the results of how the tool is being used? How do you build that over time? And so it certainly can be done, but that's just to add on, it's probably not the overnight process there. Great opportunity. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, all those things are great comments, and thanks for sharing for my fellow panelists. But at some point, you still think that we provide a basic human need. There's still going to be a need for, a human to go put a hard hat on and roll a truck and make sure those poles are off of the ground and the wires up. And, at the same time, we can be more efficient. We can make people, as you say, like a force multiplier. But sometimes there's nothing beats like having that actual people in the field doing actual work in front of actual customers. Seems like that is, we're never going to lose that, I think.
Yeah, I think, Dan, I would love to hear your perspective kind of on this, adjustment to the question of, I remember earlier in the conversation, you were bringing up the point of like, sounds like in your case, the regulator is looking to, businesses, operators outside the utility to bring some innovation to life in the space. So I'm curious from your perspective, and other panelists, please chime in. If you're thinking about, grid modernization investments, intersection with AI, are there specific areas where it does make sense to allow that like Gen AI innovation and grid mod development to happen outside the utility versus certain activities and initiatives that should be handled in-house all the time?
Well, it could. I mean, I don't think people should just ignore that as an option. But at the same time, we want I think the incumbent utility wants the opportunity to compete for that. And I think that's kind of where, the issues start to kind of become difficult for us. We like to think we do things pretty well. And I think that, as an industry, we do, and we evolve. And I think that there's a place for third parties. There's no question. But I would also like the opportunity to have my guys show their stuff. And then, when we're good at something, be rewarded for it.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think there is in some cases, perhaps like not the either or, but like where they're kind of partnership opportunities. So like one of the things that we, the National Grid, we've got our National Grid Partners organization, which is like partially a corporate venture capital arm. It's got some other innovation components to it, but it's like there's a whole host of innovative portfolio, startup and later stage companies that then they bring in, and we, within the core regulated business, get sort of access to conversations. Are there opportunities for us to do something different? Are there things that we might not be aware of in terms of what we're focused on day to day? There's a Next Grid Alliance that I think other utilities, maybe some people on this call, are a part of, that is sort of led by National Grid. And then I think, but to that point, it's like when we think about going to our regulators, they do want to also see, not only are you potentially partnering on some of these things, but have you explored other funding opportunities too? Like, we definitely get that. So like in our states, we've got NYSERDA, for those who are familiar in New York, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. There's other ones where, there's federal DOE opportunities. That certainly evolves over time in terms of the current climate. But there are then some of those things where we might say, what is part of our core business, and what are some of these additional opportunities that we still want to be innovating on, but we might either be doing it in partnership and or going through another funding opportunity that then we can get some learnings from something external and demonstrate the benefits to our customers of something maybe smaller scale, that then makes it into like our core regulatory filings and can be more attractive to our regulators. So that's just another lens that we think about it at National Grid.
Yeah, I don't know that any utility is going to crack, AI in, system planning and all this by themselves, right? Energy is, I think, a really attractive problem for people to work on. Typically, the PhD AI software engineers aren't clamoring to work at utilities, but so I totally agree with Josh. This is going to be all about partnerships.
Absolutely. Yeah. Partnerships key, building that ecosystem for innovation, and value for customers. I maybe want to add, just kind of circle back to one last question on this broader topic of affordability before we move on. A lot of the topics we've been covering so far are, like really big picture, massive investment, longer term style programs, whether it's, improving interconnection systems, whether it's, standing up, virtual power plants, things of that nature. Curious from your perspectives, is there low hanging fruit that we should be thinking about addressing from a grid modernization standpoint that can, unlock short-term affordability for customers? Are any of you seeing anything in a short-term perspective?
I'll take a half stab at that while the other panelists are thinking of on better responses than what I'll give. So this isn't quite the answer to your question, because it's not exactly grid modernization, but I'll sort of tie it to that a little bit. One of the things that came to mind when you were talking about short-term, or at least more immediate affordability, which I agree has become, especially this past winter in the Northeast, is a huge deal for us, and is top of mind for us and our regulators. One of the things that we led on in New York that we're now looking at replicating in Massachusetts is we launched a low-income community solar program. And the concept there was basically that we've got a lot of customers that are not participating in the energy transition and are, not the ones that are being targeted for community solar projects. So they're not getting the benefits of that. And how can we change that? And we created this sort of program where developer projects could enroll, sign up for the program. And basically what we would do as the middleman utility would be to take away the challenge of customer acquisition for the developers. And we would just pool, customer acquisition and billing, two big challenges, two big costs for developers. And we'd pool a portion of the developer's revenue and distribute it as bill credits among our entire low-income customer base. And basically say, you're getting, as a low-income customer, it's an opt-out, you get enrolled into the program, and you just start to see a credit on your bill that is just a slightly lower bill than you had the month before, the year before. The developers, they benefit because while they're getting a little bit less revenue, they're eliminating a lot larger costs. And then we operate the program, and it got expanded within New York State. But like I said, we're looking at something in Massachusetts, not grid modernization per se, but I do think that it's indicative of the kind of thinking that we need to do when we go, okay, if affordability is a big problem, sometimes people think of affordability and clean energy or like climate change as inherently at odds. And I think we need to really challenge ourselves in the industry to think about where are there opportunities to think about those clean energy, technologies, and how can we come up with innovative, perhaps business models versus technologies that can end up, providing benefits from an affordability perspective and getting us towards some of the, the state goals that we might have, depending on where you are. So just a thought on that end. I'll see if the other panelists have anything they want to add.
I think that was a great answer. But also, yeah, and we're similarly pursuing low income programs for community solar, and basically all of our programs have some sort of enhanced incentive that lower income customers can get. And maybe the other low hanging fruit is just thinking about things like just behavioral demand response, and again, maybe not grid modernization, but just ways to get customers to engage in an incentive service without needing a technology investment to support that, which can also provide, benefits to the grid and peak shaving.
I might hit the same from a slightly different angle, which is, I mean, obviously the topic of affordability, you would think that there are different segments of customers and what affordability might mean to a low income customer. Even within low income customers, there are probably segments, right? I might encourage low hanging fruit, just the right segmentation for the business. If a person is really trying to drive home strategy on affordability, I would recommend a strategy that helps you understand what does that mean to the people, right? I think avoiding the danger of throwing things at people without really understanding who is it for and does this resonate and is this the right way they would think about it. I might even encourage or ask folks to spend some time talking to customers. If you were finding that you have a thing that is for low income customers, well, whatever customers you find that fits in that bucket, bringing them in, whether it's through a focus group, it's like really listening, like how does this fit in their lives? Does this fit in their lives? Are we making assumptions, right? I think one of the things I speak a lot about and is that the tendency for hubris, I think, in how companies interact with customers on the topic of affordability. We know what you need. We get it, and I tend to ward against that even within conversations internally. So that might be the low hanging fruit, is being clear on who you're talking to, what are their specific needs, and can you get proximity does a lot of things in breaking assumptions. And so can you get proximate to that population?
I mean, those are great answers. I would click D, all of the above. But the last comment from you, tell me about the, are we designing programs for customers that really want, I think resonates with my experience here in Connecticut. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you all. All great answers. Maybe if we just transition slightly on the topic here, I think the conversation so far today has been very utility centric in terms of technologies being used, innovations being deployed, communication tools and strategies that are resonating with customers. But obviously, utilities don't operate in a vacuum, and there are obviously outside regulatory and policy considerations at local or state levels or beyond that utilities have to account for in their planning. Dan, maybe if I start with you on this one, what role are you seeing, state mandates, for example, in areas like energy efficiency, clean energy, or otherwise? What role are those kind of state policies or regulatory regimes playing in driving customer-centric solutions and programs from your perspective?
Yeah, I think quite a bit. And I think, in a universe where we are not the driving force, given the regulator, the state programs are really what's driving the bus here. And we are very supportive of those programs. I think we've had success in rolling them out, and they're well funded. They're well regulated, I think. We've had success there. So whether it's energy efficiency, some of the EV programs, battery storage, I mean, these are things that I think are working very well for us, and we fully support. And just back to that comment, are we identifying or designing programs for customers that customers really want? Sometimes you sit back and you wonder, is like, well, a low-income customer want an EV program? Or if so, maybe that program looks a little different for different areas. I think those are the things where I think, we need to challenge a little bit and think more proactively and, talk to customers on, how do we best design these programs for wherever you may find yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And Josh, I know, National Grid operates in some very, forward-thinking jurisdictions in terms of energy system planning. What about you? What role are you seeing state mandates play in sort of the customer-centric solutions or programs that are managed by Grid?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Dan, like we have like very, sort of specific regulatory dockets for like our energy efficiency programs, which we've been doing for a long time, for our EV programs. And like, I think there is a lot of good stakeholder engagement through those, where it's not just like a vacuum of here's what needs to be done. National Grid goes and does it. And in some cases, like what Dan was mentioning, like some of the programs we operate in Massachusetts are part of an umbrella together with other utilities. So it's also not just National Grid doing that.
Right.
I think that there's a couple other things that I would add. I mean, one is I sort of referenced it before, but in Massachusetts, all the utilities were mandated to file. It was a new thing for the first time. I guess the original version was, last January of last year, electric sector modernization plans, ESMP for short. And that's going under active review. There's, expecting an order sometime in the month of June. But those were, very high levels, a lot about grid infrastructure and the build out and how do we build the right infrastructure to get to our 2050 goals. But I think what I at least was appreciative of in the framing of it was where there was an opportunity within that context too for what are the customer facing innovations or programs or offerings that can help with that it's not just customer stuff over here and building out new substations over here. And I think that was a big opportunity for us to try to tell a cohesive story together. And then the last piece is in both states, there's a lot of outside of the actual rate cases and the electric sector modernization plans, there's different studies and like joint utility with third party. And I mentioned both Mass Clean Energy Center, Mass CEC, and NYSERDA earlier. Like Mass CEC, we've got a grid flexibility study going on right now that sounds like the same thing you've probably heard about for 20 years, but it actually is getting all the utilities in a room, engaging with stakeholders in the industry, talking to, to customers to a degree, but trying to get alignment on like, what is the best way? I saw a question in the chat that maybe we'll get to, but like, what is the best way to engage customers for these things that we talk about in these rooms internally? And like, I think that's really helpful because it then makes it so that we're not proposing something without having talked to anybody for 2 years and just hoping that we see it the same way as our regulators see it and our other stakeholders see it. So I think there's sort of the interim outside of the clear lines conversations that are really, really critical. So as much of that as I think anyone can push on in your respective states, I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, and Josh, maybe let's touch on that question now, since it's kind of a nice dovetail here. For those who haven't seen it in the chat, we got a good question from an audience member, Natalie. Thanks for submitting. Natalie is curious, how utilities are thinking about working with customers versus aggregators to drive great outcomes. I think this is up, Josh, about the community solar programs and how Grid is helping aggregate customer demand for programs like that. So, are there different considerations in terms of customer experience or perhaps benefits or drawbacks from directly owning that customer experience that you want to share?
I called it out because it's a great question and it's very top of mind. And there's a lot of conversations that we're having on this topic yesterday, today, tomorrow. I don't think we have a perfect answer. One of the approaches that we've had in terms of what we've proposed in Massachusetts and what we've started to touch on, do in New York as well, is to try some different approaches and see what works before kind of Utibe's point about like assuming we have all the answers and sort of the hubris behind that. So like one example that's very specific to this question is I talked about how we have these system-wide demand response programs. So we operate it through a partner energy hub, and then a customer has a specific offering. This is the amount of money you get for enrolling your thermostat. Here it is. So you could think about that as a starting point and say, well, if we want to add on local value, you could just add on to that program and just go that route. And then the customer experience is I'm still part of this program and now I'm part of, let's say, demand response plus because I happen to be in this location. Or you might go the route where it's more of a non-wires alternative approach where we put out to the market, here's the need that we have in this area for 2 megawatts over the next 5 years. Aggregators and third parties, you go ahead and you go find the customers and you submit a bid and we can see what the best bid is and we'll go that way. Now that sounds good on paper from a market-driven approach, but what it might lead to, you could theorize, would be customer confusion. I'm part of this program and now a bunch of different aggregators are coming to me saying, I can make more money if I do this other thing with my battery, but I thought I was already doing that. So it starts to become what's the customer experience behind it? And I think we don't know the answers. And what we're trying to do is actually launch some new offerings with multiple approaches. So like the two that I just outlined being kind of different approaches to engaging customers and seeing what works best and potentially saying, let's evaluate what works best over, a year, a couple of years, not too long, and then scale what works and roll back and pull back a little bit on what doesn't. So I don't think we would pretend to have the answers. Certainly we've looked at peer utilities and seen some experiences that they've had, but those are the kinds of things where benefits and drawbacks, we kind of want to do it and see. And that's been the approach that we've been taking internally, but I just thought it was a really good question. So.
Yeah, I love that perspective. John is somebody who's been involved with, VPPs and, DER implementation at Puget Sound Energy. I'm curious if you have thoughts or a reaction to this question from Natalie as well.
Yeah, we've done both. I think primarily for demand response, we're using our VPP, which is, we sort of funnel aggregators into, but I think the main point here is that we are very careful about the customer experience and we don't let the aggregators go off and handle that without our direct involvement and input. And so it's really much more of a partnership. So my team will develop a product, say for residential batteries. Eventually that will be, the mechanics of that incentive and maybe the dispatch of that capacity will be handled through our contract with the aggregator, but the customer experience will be sort of developed by my team and we getting that sort of consistent customer experience and adoption is critical to making any of this work. So whether it's an aggregator or whether the utility is going direct to customer, we've got to make sure that we're owning the experience the whole way through.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. So as we're coming up on time here, I know we covered a lot of ground today talking about technology, innovation, affordability, state policy and how that affects kind of the utility customer relationship. Conversation has been incredibly informative. Once again, thank you, Utibe, Dan, Josh, and John for being generous with your time and sharing your insights on this important topic. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to turn it over to each of you one last time to share just a closing thought with our audience members. In your closing statement, I encourage you to share anything else that's top of mind for you in this space that we maybe didn't have a chance to cover today, or perhaps a key takeaway from this conversation that you hope others walk away with, plugging a certain initiative or resource that you think audience members should dig into to learn more about this topic, or really anything else. The choice is yours. So, Utibe, why don't we start with you?
I think a lot of what I intended to share has been shared. Honestly, a lot of my fellow panelists. The framework I often pull on in my mind in conversations like this and others is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because for me, it centers me on there's some foundational things that if they're not met, we haven't earned the right to do anything or ask for anything or engage customers in any way. So not that specific framework, but for within the utility industry, right? Reliability is critical. Affordability is critical. And so those things at the bottom of the pyramid, they're essential. And so I think whatever that looks like for different partners or folks that are listening, just having that clear, what is the true, I think you said ground zero, Nolan, like what truly is ground zero for for our customers and letting that be the why behind everything else. Might be my own summary of a lot of the conversation here today, but I think it's been a really good conversation. I've learned a lot, and I think a lot of the things I came in with has been shared by my panelists as well.
Yeah, thanks, Utibe. Dan, let's go to you.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, guys. I mean, I echo Utibe's thoughts. I feel like I've learned a lot, and one of the things I always take away from these kind of conversations, whether it's, in this format or from traveling throughout the eVTOL universe, is like we're all dealing with the same issues and some various slightly different flavor of all the same challenges, no matter where we are. And it's always exciting to see folks, talk about their experience and know that we're not alone. So I'll leave you with that. But thanks, Nolan.
Thanks, Dan. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I'll echo the thanks. This has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot as well. And thanks, Nolan and Mike, again for organizing. I like Utibe, feel like a lot of the things that I was hoping to share and talk about with the rest fellow panelists and the audience that I've done. But the one thing, as you were asking the question, I was thinking about is I was looking at the title again, enhancing customer experience through grid modernization. And one of the things that I think we didn't spend a ton of time on is around like organizational design and sort of how people talk to each other within our companies. I haven't worked at other utilities besides National Grid, so I can only speak about one particular example, but I have a sense that there's some shared experiences there. And I think what I would encourage is customer experience and grid modernization sometimes can be thought of very separately. Like we have people in distribution planning that their primary goal is making sure that the network is safe and reliable and, upgrading substations and doing work over here. And then there's the contact center and there's the customer surveys and there's people in the customer org doing their programs. And I know we've been very intentional at National Grid about trying to bridge, those silos as much as possible. And I think like we can't be successful without making sure that we've got both the right people, but the right processes and structures in place internally to make sure that, say before a grid modernization investment is being made, that people are being talked to throughout the entire customer organization and customers themselves to make it clear what those benefits are. Some topics that we just, talked about before. How do you create those processes so that investment decisions aren't being made too late, versus having talked to the right people for customer benefits early? That is a topic area that I think is organizationally maybe something for everyone to think about. Like, are you set up for success in terms of how the organizations run? I know it's been, I think, for us, a work in progress, and we're in a better spot today than we were 2 or 3 years ago. But thanks again. This was really, really great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Well said. John, let's have you close us out.
Awesome. Thank you. This was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed meeting my fellow panelists and listening to and learning from you all. Maybe the last thought that I have here is, we talked a lot about affordability, and I think that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I don't know that there is a right answer for affordability, given how people's energy usage is changing and will change based on where the market is taking all these different technologies that we use in our daily lives. And so I'm trying to think about things more in the terms of value. And so what value is our customers getting from the services that we provide, as maybe they're spending less money on gasoline, but more money on electricity because they have an electric car, or, they're getting the cooling from a heat pump as well as heating, and sort of how we articulate that value proposition, even in terms of resiliency benefit that they can get from either a behind the meter battery or eventually something like a vehicle to home kind of technology is I think something that we're thinking about, and how do we unlock that instead of just talking about affordability? Because I think any way you slice it, the investments we have to make will drive upward pressure on rates. But what is the value that the customer is getting, and can we show that is worth it to the customers?
Absolutely. Yeah. Great closeout. Thank you, John. And thank you, Utibe, John, Josh, Dan. Thanks for being generous with your time and participating in this webinar. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mike for a brief closing statement here.
Yeah, I've just so many great nuggets of wisdom today in the conversation. I jotted a lot of things down, but Utibe, I really loved when you said it's not what you say, it's what they hear. I think it's just an incredible reminder for all of us. Josh, I think your discussion around identifying what are the moments that matter for customers, such a critical point. Um, Dan, you spoke a lot about safe and reliable service being at the core. It's our central mission. And it's funny because what I wrote down as you were saying that was something Utibe said later, which was like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? I got to immediately write that down, and then it was said later. I just think we've got to earn our right to offer the next level of service for customers, and it starts with safe and reliable service. And then John, I love the conversation around this concept of a digital twin for customers that you can test and learn with. I just thought it was a really interesting thought. Just for everyone that joined today, thank you. Please feel free to contact any of today's panelists if you have additional questions about what you heard today. Also, I am more than happy to connect anyone with an expert at West Monroe, so don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to everyone who attended today's webinar. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much.